According to the cloud. All right. Now behave yourselves. Future
Right.
generations will see this.
Future generations.
All right. And Jim, if I remember correctly, you forwarded the Zoom link to Tara's campaign.
I did.
Poor Jim.
I'm less checking Jim and more myself.
They acknowledged it.
Oh,
Yep.
there you go.
That's better than the other two.
Exactly. That's better than you. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
But I don't see our person yet.
Nope, I'm sure. I know I've been late to like 5 Zoom meetings this week just because they've been back to back and bio breaks are still necessary. So.
And 'tis the season for her. So.
Yeah.
I blame every calendar system because it just puts you into an hour meeting or a 30-minute meeting. It never says you really should only go 55 minutes so that you can take that break in between.
Mm-hmm.
Not you.
Nope. Not Google Calendar.
Unfortunately, I don't have Tara's. I've been working through her campaign.
Oh, they're
There
here.
she is.
They're here.
What's happening?
I'm here. Sorry.
Hi.
It's all good.
No problem.
Hi.
Oh, look,
Hi.
you and a friend.
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Hi. We look a little blurry on our side. Hi. I'm trying to get my lights fixed so we can see me better. I'm sorry. It's dinner time and everything's a little chaotic, but I'm so happy to be here.
That's just fine. We're waiting for a handful additional people. There are about 12 or 13 people that signed up.
Great.
We're waiting for a few more to click on.
What's your baby's name? Remind me.
Oh, and then somebody else just signed up.
Oh, yay. Oh, good.
That's funny.
Good.
Uh,
What's your baby's name, Tara?
Ava Kai.
Oh, so cute.
Spelled?
EEVAKAI.
Okay.
So it means Ava means life and Kai means ocean.
Oh,
Nice.
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 Beautiful.
Appropriate here in Encinitas.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. I mean, I love the ocean. That's why I live there. So.
You live in Encinitas?
hmm
That's what I thought.
I live near Moonlight.
Ah,
Lovely.
good.
Right.
Nice.
Even in the middle of the campaign, I do try to jump in for at least like 5 minutes every day.
Good.
Much better.
I bet you do.
Soothes the soul.
Yep.
Hey, you're done. No more Zoom. That was boring, Mom.
That was boring. These are boring.
You, huh?
No more Zoom.
No more
I bet she's had a little much Zoom these days.
Yeah, right?
I imagine.
And you have also. Are you just on Zoom all the time?
Are you
I'm on Zoom all day
day.
and all night.
Aw.
Sometimes I'll have do phone calls.
Yeah. Well, how's it going? Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, here comes somebody.
Somebody else?
and not to be rude, but I'm going to start muting folks in just a moment.
Okay. Don't mute Carla till we make sure she's on. Carla, can you hear us?
Are you mentioning Carla? Carla can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll mute myself. Thanks.
Good. Thanks very much. I just unmuted myself. And Tara, you're unmuted, so you and I can have a conversation. But I'm still going to wait for a couple of
Great.
minutes but
Two cards.
we got 2 Carlas.
Can I say something? Just can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I'm over here with Jim's now.
This is my wife, Kathleen.
Hi there, Tara.
Hi.
Yeah, I just want to make one little statement. I loved the town hall that you had with Catherine. Thought that was just a great evening. And you did a beautiful job. We got to
I
hear
thought
a
it was
lot.
wonderful as well.
So I just wanted you to know it was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, I want to tell you guys, I'm really excited to talk to you. We have quite a fight ahead of us. It is really going to be an incredibly close race. And Encinitas in particular is ground zero. It's where we will probably win or lose the race, is Encinitas. I don't think people totally realize that, but sort of when you look at the numbers, I should be able to win Encinitas pretty handily because it's a much bigger Democratic registration. But a lot of people know Kristen. She was the mayor. She has a lot of name ID, and I don't. And so the problem is it doesn't say Democrat next to your name on the ballot because it's officially a nonpartisan seat. And so people are going to just look at the ballot and they're going to vote for her because they've heard of her. And so my biggest priority, you're all frozen.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So one of my biggest priorities is absolutely figuring out how we can talk to our friends and neighbors in Encinitas. It's the work that, we need to be tripling, quadrupling down on. And the thing that we've really found in the campaign is that sort of traditional campaigning tactics where you do mail and email works pretty well in most of San Diego because they don't know either of us. But it's not working in Encinitas because people know Kristen. And so the thing that we're really focused on is how we can kind of get everyone to talk to their neighbors. That's kind of the route to victory.
Yeah, I appreciate having that information as sort of background to where we are, in the campaign situation. But I want to say everybody who is here, I know, except I don't know Carla. And Carla, for your benefit, this is an organization, Faith in Action at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church. And we've put on this forum and invited Tara Lawson-Remmer, who's the Democratic candidate for supervisor from the 3rd District. Should say and will say that we invited Kristen Gaspar to participate, but she declined our invitation. And we're going to let Tara tell us some more about herself, her background, and a little bit about her vision. And then we have a series of questions that we're going to pose to Tara. These are questions that our organization, our Faith in Action group, put together because there are things that we're concerned about and interested in hearing Tara's view on these subjects. And after those questions have been posed and Tara's responded, we'll open it up to Q&A. There is, because we're on the regular Zoom, there's a chat feature on the Zoom. So if anybody has additional questions or follow up to we won't interrupt Tara with the questions and answers that I and a couple of my colleagues are going to pose. But after that's done, then we'll have an opportunity to read some of the questions that you might pose in the chat box. So keep muted until it's time for me to call on one of you to be able to speak or ask a question. But mainly it's going to be myself and Virginia Sublette, who's a member of our group, and also Gigi Miller, who will be posing the questions to Tara. So Tara, why don't you give us your background information as you wish so we can get to know you better, and give us a little bit of thought about some of your vision for the future of the work of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors.
Great. Well, I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm really grateful that you all take the time out of your busy schedules to get together and convene and talk about these issues that are so important for the future of San Diego and our entire region, and honestly, the world that we live in. So a little bit about me. I'm a third generation San Diegan. My grandpa was a Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton. My mom grew up in Vista and Oceanside, and I grew up in sort of the more southern part of San Diego County. And I now live in Encinitas with my daughter. So service and public service and service to community is really kind of a core value in my family growing up. And I started my career in public service working for the San Diego City Council as a staff assistant for then Councilman, now Congressman Juan Vargas. And then I went to Yale for undergrad. So I left San Diego. I spent a number of years working, doing social justice movement organizing, working for the United Farm Workers as a student organizer. And I started a national student organization to fight back against redlining and predatory lending, and to fight for environmental justice and a green energy future and clean energy investments in the global economy. So I did that work for a number of years. Then I went back to school on a full scholarship to earn my law degree and my PhD in political economy. After that, I was an educator. I taught public policy for quite a number of years, and I worked in the Obama administration in the Treasury Department as a senior advisor. So working on sustainable development and helping countries recover after economic crises. So a lot of my work in that capacity, I worked on cutting pollution from big oil and mining companies, but also working with countries on their green energy and climate investments, and working as well with countries who had undergone a lot of political turmoil to figure out how to get economically back on their feet after those really difficult times. So I moved back to San Diego about 5 or 6 years ago now, and started a small business doing social change strategy consulting, as well as working at UCSD teaching public policy. Spent the last couple years really working to try to bring some equilibrium to Washington. I'm really appalled with sort of the right-wing radicalism that I see from the Trump administration. I think it does not, it's not the values I share. So doing my part to try to bring some checks and balances to our government and elect Mike Levin. And then, after that, I looked around and I realized that we really had not the kind of leadership that I think we need in San Diego, especially at the Board of Supervisors. We've had a Board of Supervisors for basically 30 years that's been essentially a do-nothing board. They just do nothing. I mean, we had a HEPA crisis a couple years ago. They didn't learn their lesson. They didn't invest in public health in the way that we should have in the wake of that crisis. And now the end result is we were radically underprepared for a global pandemic. I mean, if we had just thought a little bit ahead, we could have been in a better situation. And this is true across the board. We have these massive problems in our jails with 140 deaths over the last 10 years because we just haven't paid attention, and we've litigated those cases defending the civil rights claims instead of making the investments up front in mental health services that we need to make sure that our inmates are safe. And you look at our climate action plan, which is so bad, it hasn't even met minimum state standards. We've been sued 3 times and lost 3 times in court. And then our current supervisors, including my opponent, Kristen Gaspar, has voted to appeal and continue wasting lots and lots of taxpayer money litigating a failed climate action plan that isn't so bad it doesn't meet these minimum standards, when they could have just turned around and tried to put together a better action plan like what they have in Los Angeles or Santa Clara County, where they've just kind of risen to the occasion. And instead our Board of Supervisors is dug in their heels because they're in the pocket of special interests. Most of their funding for their campaigns, like my opponent's campaign, comes from big developers. So they are going to vote for big development projects that hurt most of the rest of us, and certainly hurt our climate and increase traffic and increase pollution, but benefit a couple of their big donor friends. And this is a lot of what I've seen in San Diego since I was a kid, the county going in the wrong direction on development. I think we need affordable housing, and instead of building affordable housing close to where people live and work in a way that would improve everyone's quality of life and make San Diego, a much more walkable, friendly community where you don't have to sit stuck in traffic, they've been approving big development projects out in our areas of our county that have been zoned in the county general plan that should be protected open space, and but they're building out there, which has a huge burden on taxpayers because we have to invest in more roads and services, but also fire services. It's really, wildfire unsafe, and it puts us all at risk of fires. And then they're giant big homes that are unaffordable. So it solves no problems, and it only creates lots and lots of problems for all of us. This has just been what we've seen and experienced. And my opponent in particular, I think I got really agitated and motivated to run when I realized who she is and who she was. Supporter of Donald Trump. She endorsed him in the primary. She's flown back to Washington 5 times to meet with his team in the White House. She voted to join his lawsuit against sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. So she voted to sue our own city and our own state of California to join that lawsuit, so that ICE could collaborate with, or that our sheriffs could collaborate with ICE. And I think that it's a real threat to public safety. We all know that if people are afraid of getting arrested and getting deported, they don't report domestic violence. They don't report incidences of crime in their neighborhood because they're scared. So it makes our streets a lot less safe, and it also really threatens the civil rights of a big portion of our community. And so we just, on so many issues, she opposes the Affordable Care Act. She wants to overturn the Affordable Care Act, which would leave 400,000 San Diegans without health care in the middle of a pandemic. She stands staunchly with Donald Trump on opposing any kind of sensible gun safety laws. And as a mom, it's just so terrifying to me that she thinks that people should be able to wander our streets with military-style assault rifles, assault weapons. And she doesn't think that we should do anything to protect our children. On COVID, which is obviously the thing that's top of all our minds since we're Zooming instead of being in person, she has been in lockstep with Trump from day number 1. She's been out there in May calling to accelerate reopening our economy long before we were ready. And her kind of whole frame is we need to protect small businesses. But if you look at the data, and I'm an economist by training, and I'm spent much of my life looking at data, you can see that the places, the countries, the cities where you really did a good job on public health and making sure that we didn't have the spread of COVID and we could get our case numbers down, then they were able to reopen sort of slowly but gradually, but then in a sustained way, which is what's good for businesses, is what's good for workers, to know you have a job, not to reopen 1 week, close 1 week, reopen 1 week, close 1 week, because you're totally erratic and are opening and case numbers are skyrocketing. And most recently, her latest sort of appalling behavior in this regard is she wants to not count a bunch of the cases in San Diego because it's making our case numbers go up. And it's just like Trump. He's like, let's not count the cases because our case numbers are higher. I'm like, yes, of course they're higher because they're high. Not you don't get your case numbers down by refusing to count cases. So I am really excited about the possibilities for the future of San Diego, about the futures of what we can do on affordable housing, a future of what we can do on investing in public health and mental health services and protecting our most vulnerable San Diegans, and on climate and on traffic. I think there's so much possibility here, and we've just been held back for so long by a do-nothing board, and the major block for improving the quality of life for everyone in San Diego is Kristen Gaspar, who's our representative and who stands in lockstep with Trump. And I'm the most the last couple of weeks, I've spent going around to lots of forums. I wish she was here, to be honest, because it would be useful for you all to listen to her. And her line is, I work with everyone to get results. And it's blatantly not true. She in her ballot statement, she says she works with Governor Newsom and Nathan Fletcher. And she can't even get Newsom's to, she's complaining on KUSA all the time that Newsom won't return her phone calls and is rejecting her appeals to reopen and accelerate the reopening of California, of San Diego, and the governor's endorsed me because he knows he wants a good partner. And then Nathan Fletcher, she's constantly complaining about how he's being terribly mean to her, and they're always fighting on Twitter. She didn't get the endorsements of any of her Republican colleagues on the board, except for the sort of very right-wing Jim Desmond, but the two other Republicans didn't endorse her. So she hasn't been able to build any support, and the only person she's working with are like right-wing, radical right-wing Trump Republicans to take our county in the wrong direction. So, I could talk a lot more about the issues and about my background, but I also really want to make sure we have an opportunity for a dialogue and for me to hear what's on your minds.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Tara. That's helpful both to get to know you better and to understand what's at stake in this particular race. We do have some questions, as you know. These are things just a little for your background and others as well. Our Faith in Action ministry at St. Andrews has been in existence for about 1.5 years now, and during that time we have come to focus on certain issues that are of particular concern to us here at Encinitas, and so our questions tend to have a focus on this community, but have a broader application as well. The first question, and also for everybody's information, these questions that we're posing from the Faith in Action Ministry, I did send to Tara ahead of time so that she was at least advised that these were the areas that we were interested in. The first question, Tara, has to do with Project Hope. The county has been operating Project Hope as a pilot program in Encinitas since the start was scheduled to start at the beginning of this year, but it didn't actually go into effect until around the time that the COVID shutdown was first put in place in mid-March. The program, as you may know, places a licensed social worker on the city staff, particularly charged with doing outreach to people who are homeless, who are on the street, and to work with them, sometimes in his capacity as a social worker, but often in the company of sheriff's deputies, to help try to address problems that homeless population has. Because this is a pilot program, we're interested to know that whether if you're elected, would you continue to support this program? And particularly, would you be in favor of trying to expand the program so that perhaps there might be not just one, but perhaps 2 social workers in this area, so they could serve not just the people on the street, but also people who are marginally homeless or home housing insecure. So can you respond?
Sure. I love the project in conception. I'm interested to see sort of the results, right? I mean, the reason to do a pilot is to see how well it's working. I'm just fundamentally a person who likes to solve problems. So for me, the question is, the challenge and the thing that we need to really tackle is how we support our homeless population to get the services they need, and maybe get into housing if possible, if that's a path that is feasible, but at least have some basic services as they're part of our community, and to do the best we can for folks. And I think that this seems promising, but I'd like to see how well it's working. I think that's the most important thing. It's why we do a pilot, right? And making sure that we're always looking at all the possibilities in terms of what the best approach is to get the job done.
I might just add this is really for your information. We've been in contact with the person who is the social worker, who is the pilot program coordinator here in Encinitas. And he has agreed to work with existing programs at our church where we're trying to do outreach to serve the homeless or housing insecure or food insecure population. And we've also talked with him and with the sheriff's office about the prospect that his work could be done just as a social worker without the necessity of having a sheriff's officer in company with him. That's, I will just tell you for your information. Virginia.
That's great. It sounds like I'm going to be coming to ask you guys whether it's how it's working.
Well, I think if I might respond, I think we love that. We think that dialogue with faith-based communities like ours who are doing outreach is something that we'd like to see happen with our elected officials. I'm going to call on Virginia Sublette, if you can unmute yourself to pose another question to you.
Hi, Tara. Nice to hear from you tonight. Really enjoying it. My question is regarding the Sheriff's Department and its funding. The Sheriff's Department, which serves Encinitas, commands a very large portion of our county's budget. If you are elected, how would you propose to reallocate resources so that money going to law enforcement, that is public safety, is not limited to traditional crime prevention policing methods, but rather would also address effective crisis intervention and de-escalation and anti-racism training?
Yeah, such a good question. I think it's really important to be making those kinds of moves. I support our law enforcement, and I've had personal experiences with our sheriffs in Encinitas, and I'm really grateful for the service that they do. And I think they do a really wonderful job in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of ways in which they are not equipped and are not able to meet some of the most pressing public safety needs in our community because they're not actually issues where you need to have an armed response, right? You need a crisis worker, you need a social worker. You need people who, know how to deal with someone who is experiencing a mental health episode, or who frankly, all it is a quality of life complaint, and people just really need help, getting access to the social services that they need. And that's just not the right kind of allocation to send a sheriff to deal with that kind of issue. So I really like the model in Eugene. It's called the Cahoots program, where they have these basically 24/7 mobile crisis response units. And when you call 911, if it's not a threat, if it's not a violent threat, then the crisis response unit gets deployed. So you have folks who are trained mental health workers, basically on call 24/7, and trained social service providers, and they're the ones who show up, when it's appropriate. Of course, there's obviously many times when that's not appropriate, but whenever it makes sense that that's the right response. And again, I think this goes back to sort of my larger perspective, is like, you want to solve the problem presented, and you don't need to have, you don't want to send the wrong person when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think that's a little bit where we're at. I go. So that's one aspect I think that's really vital and really critical. I think more broadly, there's no question that the many deaths of young Black men and some Black women that we've seen, from law enforcement over the last decades, but sort of almost coming to a crisis point over the last couple years, is a huge tragedy, a huge tragic injustice. And it's an injustice and a tragedy, partly of policing, certainly, and systemic failures in that regard, but also partly of systemic racism, sort of throughout our society and our culture, dating back to founding of America. I mean, we were founded on a bargain that was struck, that allowed the states to form, And it has been, the tension at the heart of our country for a really long time, ever since that moment. And I think part of what the civil rights movement did and was, and part of what the movement for Black Lives Matter is a demand for America to live up to its principles and to be the place that we aspire to be, that so many of us believe in, that we all fight for, that we care about, a place that values equality and equality under the law and equal rights of everyone. And, you're not judged by the color of your skin. And we have work to do to get there.
And let me ask, Tara, the Cahoots program that you referenced, is that in Eugene, Oregon? Is that what you were referring to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a sort of related follow-up question, which is not something that we sent to you in advance, but hopefully you can tune to it. Because we were talking about the sheriff's budget, the sheriff's department and general public safety budget commanding such a huge portion of the county's budget. There's also been concern about the lack of transparency in the county's budgeting process. Can you comment on that and indicate how that might be improved?
Yes, definitely. I mean, one of the things I noticed first when I started paying attention to the county is this lack of budget transparency. So my opponent, Kristen Gaspar, has voted against having evening budget hearings. And I really think we should have evening budget hearings because it's working people can't just leave their jobs in the middle of the day and go down to the county for a budget meeting. So I think we should have budget meetings that are evening budget hearings. And it's not just that. There's another issue. That's the one people talk a lot about is the budget hearings. But there's also an issue of how the budget's presented. It's very opaque. So if you look at the budget documents, you have to be like a forensic accountant to figure out what one funding source is for versus another funding source. And that has to stop. Like we need budget documentation that is legible and understandable so people actually know what an item is supposed to be spent on. So a very good example is there are a whole bunch of funds that the county has that are basically county reserves. They're reserves that have been stockpiled over 30 years, which is healthy for the most part for the fiscal sustainability of our county. But it's gotten to a point that's out of control. Recommended by Standard & Poor's to have at least 30 to 50% of reserves, and we have 70% of reserves. So the reason you can't tell that immediately when looking at the budget is because they call the accounts are different names. It's not called a reserve. And so there's sort of a sleight of hand in how the budget is presented and explained that it makes it very difficult for anyone, including, frankly, the electeds, unless you're a person sort of like me who doesn't take no for the answer and wants to get to the bottom of things, to understand what's the what. And we have to change that because it's $6.3 billion and we need to know how it's being spent. My opponent, Kristen Gaspar, actually voted, or she didn't vote because nobody else would give her a second, but she proposed to reduce transparency over the community reinvestment funds that are controlled by the county supervisors. So the county supervisors each have sort of a pot of money that's meant to be used to reinvest in our community groups, and that you have to go through an oversight process, but it's not out of the county general funds. And she wanted to reduce, nearly eliminate the oversight of those funds. Luckily, she didn't get a second. But this is sort of an endemic issue at the county and certainly something I'd be tackling. And one of my big concerns about her, another thing, I could just go on, but another thing I'm very concerned about is how she recommended $2 million be given to a group called Saved in America that ultimately they couldn't give the money to them because once the county council looked at their shady operations, they had to rescind the vote. But she didn't disclose that she was on the board. She didn't tell anyone. So the problem wasn't that just that you recommend a group, but you have to be transparent about your relationship with the organization. So this is a huge issue for sure at the county and something I definitely think we need to tackle head on.
I'm going to change the focus a little bit. You, in your opening remarks, you mentioned a little bit about the county's failures with respect to planning for or dealing with the COVID pandemic. What do you see the county's role to be looking forward? Let's for a minute not just go back and hash what may have been their failures, but going forward, what do you see the county's role to be in managing the COVID pandemic, both in terms of public health issues and in terms of the economy?
So I think the first things first is we need to get our case numbers down, and that's squarely in the county's mandate. And there's really four things that we could do a lot better. One is we have to be a lot more innovative in creating ways in which businesses can operate without having indoor dining, without putting us in high risk situations. So I think we should stay closed. Our indoor dining should stay closed, but we should really help businesses open and do outdoor dining and operate outdoors until we're at such a place that our case numbers are low enough that our schools can reopen. I think schools should be first. So we need, and it wouldn't take that long. I think that's the other part of it. You know, we've really gotten ourselves in this big mess because instead of just having a slightly bit more patience, right? You know, we're shut down for like a month. And if we could just wait 3 more weeks, our case numbers would fall far enough down that the risk of community transmission would be significantly lower. And then you would couple that with people wearing masks, we would be fine. I mean, this is what they've done in Singapore. This is what they've done all over the world. But we're just so impatient. So I think a big part of the county's leadership is to just help us stay the course long enough to get those numbers down so that we can reopen and then stay open, because we've reduced those numbers low enough that then we're not on this roller coaster. I think a big part of that also requires recognizing that we can't expect businesses to meet these demands in this moment alone. It's not fair and it's not possible. A lot of our small businesses are really suffering, and I think the county could do a lot more to help them out, to support them, to have the PPE, but also, you know, to retrofit their businesses so that they can operate safely. And I think the county has just sort of thrown it on them and hasn't stepped up to help them out enough. I think the next thing that we do need to do is really scale up contact tracing. It's taking forever to do contact tracing. It takes like 2 weeks right now. It's too long. So by that time, you know, how many people has someone talked to or been with in 2 weeks? It's way too long. We've done better at the testing, but not as good enough. I think that we should be in a situation where you can get your test back in a day. Right now, it could be up to 5 days. And I think that's far too long. So we need to scale up contact tracing, scale up testing, and really focus on getting our case numbers down with better measures around keeping sort of high-risk businesses closed, supporting those businesses to cover costs and sort of make it through that difficult time, because they shouldn't have to bear that alone, and then really being a lot more assertive around folks wearing masks. So that's in the shorter term. I think in the longer term, we are looking at, you know, getting our economy reopened and back on track. And one of the things that we definitely have to do is look for how do we protect the people in our community that are most vulnerable in this difficult time. That's a core mandate of the county. And that's also good for economic spending. So one of the things that I think we often think of, we often think when the county spends money, it's just like a waste. It's not true. If you're helping people afford food, that's helping our local businesses because they have to buy food. And especially people who are at the lowest income lowest rungs of our income ladder, they spend every penny of that paycheck. So there's a multiplier effect. If the county helps folks out with, you know, food, for example, and make sure they have access to food stamps, it's a 1 to 3. So $1 invested by the county is a multiplier of $3 respent in the local economy, which is really important for businesses. And we saw that actually at a national level with the unemployment subsidy and supplement. The reason that we did not see the massive economic slowdown that actually a lot of economists predicted is because of that. Sorry.
Bless you.
Because of that $650 unemployment supplement. And so there wasn't a slowdown in consumer spending. People could still pay their rent. People could still buy clothes, buy food, pay for school, pay for gas, pay for the car, basically pay for all their lives because they had the assistance to do so. If we had not had that $650 additional, we would have really fallen off an economic cliff. And this is basic, fundamental, like Econ 101. It's called counter-cyclical economic spending. So basically means when you're in a recession or a contraction, the government should not spend less, should not contract, because if they do, it creates a downward spiral, because then you have less money to the most vulnerable, then they have less money to spend, businesses have less money. That's how come we ended up in the Great Depression, is because we had a massive stock crisis, and then the government retrenched, and then everything went off the cliff. And we get out of those moments when you have counter-cyclical spending. And so we have to be looking at the places in which we need to be supporting our most vulnerable, but also other, I think, things that are really critical needs in San Diego, like affordable housing, investing in improving our roads and our transit infrastructure and our public transit, because those are also places that those are things that we need, but also create jobs and spending in the local economy that benefit our workers and benefit our businesses.
And let me ask you a somewhat related question, but a little more narrowly focused. But speaking of the relief funds to fight the COVID pandemic, the funds that were allocated to the county through the CARES Act back in May or June were spent by the county almost exclusively in the city of San Diego, particularly for the provision for housing at the convention center. None of that money found its way to any of the outlying cities in the county, like the city of Encinitas. How could we remedy that situation?
Well, I do think it's an example, and again, of why my opponent has been really a failure for our community. She did not do a good job advocating for us, and it's because she hasn't built alliances and relationships, even though she's on a board of supervisors with 1 Democrat and 4 Republicans. The Democrat is sort of much better at building the coalition. So she just hasn't done the work to sort of build those relationships to deliver for our community, and it's really unfortunate. I think what I think is really a priority in sort of in our community, there's a lot of small businesses that are suffering. I mean, there's also a lot of folks that are homeless and vulnerable, but proportionately, we do have more of those, proportionally by per capita, we have more small businesses than we do large businesses as opposed to the rest of the county. And I think that's something that we really should be prioritizing.
Okay, good. Let me call on Virginia. Virginia, if you could pose the next question, which has to do with housing.
Yes, be happy to. As you know, Encinitas and other cities in District 3 suffer from a lack of affordable housing. What do you see as the county's role in increasing the supply of affordable housing, especially in upscale, high-cost real estate cities like Encinitas?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. So I think from like a very like nuts and bolts practical perspective, it really actually is outside the county's jurisdiction and mandate. I mean, it is fundamentally a question that has to be decided by Encinitas, because the county just doesn't have jurisdiction over building housing in Encinitas or other cities. What I do think the county could do a lot better on is sort of creating the conditions to make it easier for the cities to do the work that needs to be done. So, for example, I think the the county could help put together some model homes that are energy efficient, LEED certified, but are partly prefab, and that way we could build them at scale and be a lot less expensive. That does not address the zoning issue. That is, I mean, I live in Encinitas. I'm well aware of our debates here around whether homes are going to be allowed or not allowed. So it does not address that issue. But I do think we could help reduce the cost of housing construction for quality, environmentally sound housing. And I think that's something that would certainly be a priority for me. We really haven't been very innovative in how we meet our housing stock demands and how we do it in a way that creates good jobs, but also prioritizes using environmentally sustainable building materials and making sure that, when you're building, you're building to last, so you don't, end up with something that has to get rebuilt and cost more later. So, losing money on the cheap. I think that's a place where the county could help lead. I do think another piece of this is, just it is very difficult for folks to support housing when they feel like it's just going to lead to more traffic. And so I think that one place that the county could help a lot in these debates is to help support investments in transit solutions so that it makes it feasible to increase housing stock in areas where people are sort of rightfully, frankly, worried that they're just going to end up sort of not being able to leave their house because there's going to be their streets are going to be jammed up. And I want to be clear, that's not going to meet everyone's concerns, right? There are going to be people who will not support more density in their neighborhood, period. But I do think there are a lot of folks who would like to see more affordable housing as long as it's done in a way that doesn't have like massive negative impacts on their quality of life. And that is something that the county can do a lot to help on. I'd like to see the coast, the train running significantly more frequently and more reliably so that you don't have to drive from Encinitas to downtown. So you could take the train and you could do it on a regular basis and it could be a lot faster. It's not just that the train should come more often, it should come more often, but it also should be quicker. And so we could help, if you get only 10% of cars off the roads, you can fundamentally radically reduce your traffic and congestion. But all of our traffic is basically caused by the last 10% of cars because that's where the clogging comes. So if we had some other opportunities or other options just for 10% of people, it would do a lot to make it possible and make it sort of realistic to have more affordable housing options. So those are two things that are on my radar. I think the third thing on my radar is putting together some sort of model approaches to ensure that when development happens, you're not just imposing sort of like massive costs and externalities on the neighborhood. And that's, from an economist point of view, it's called internalizing externalities, which basically means that if you have a big negative impact, you need to pay for it. And I think the county could help ensure that when you construct affordable housing, that the county can come in and help pay for those negative costs. So therefore you're compensating the neighborhood so that's not like unfairly an unfair imposition, but you're also encouraging and making it more feasible to build affordable housing. So again, this is living in Encinitas. I know how difficult this question is. I mean, we've litigated and litigated and litigated. There's no silver bullet, but I think the county could be a better partner.
Yeah, and let me just ask and expand on that just a little bit. Maybe I'm pushing you outside your base of knowledge, but talking about city-county partnerships, are you aware of, or have you done any research to look at the question of whether there is any county-owned property within the city of Encinitas boundaries that somehow could be allocated for development of affordable housing?
I've done a little bit, but not enough to say with certainty. My initial research is that there's not. but I still don't think I've exhausted the work I would need to do to be certain about that, because there's certainly nothing available immediately, right? But that doesn't mean there might not be some kind of buildings that could be better used in a different way.
Good. My last question is half a comment and half a question, and then I'm going to open it up to any others who wish to pose it. And we talked about this just a little bit early on, and that has to do with the work that organizations like ours and faith-based communities might do to address and work with the county on some of these issues. Do you have a vision about that?
No, I'll be honest. I like to speak within my competency. So I think I would love to know your thoughts. You know, how we could be better partners. It's not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, and I would just comment, for example, because we've been looking at the housing issue, when the housing action plan is currently being considered by the city of Encinitas and will be coming before the city council. When we looked at the early drafts of the housing action plan, one of the things that was evident is that they did not look at what community organizations, not necessarily just faith-based, but other nonprofit organizations within the community could do to lend a hand and assist meeting the needs of those people who are either homeless or housing insecure or food insecure, and partner with city agencies in trying to serve that part of the community. So we're making a pitch both to the city, and we would to the county as well, that you ought to be looking at resourcing and partnering with faith-based organizations who can help meet the needs of the underserved community. So
yeah.
So with that, I'm not seeing questions in the chat room or in the chat box. I don't know, Virginia, do you have any? No.
Not really. I mean, I would be interested in something that's off topic, but I'll just keep it to myself. Basically about east-west transit extensions to the trolley, for example, but it's not really pertinent to Encinitas, so I'll just keep it to myself.
Something to think about. Anybody else here in the meeting wish to pose a question to Tara, or a follow-up to any of the things that have been discussed?
I have a question. First, Tara, thanks for your time. We really do appreciate this. Do you have thoughts on the county's handling of mental health issues? Because those are typically tied right back into homelessness, drug abuse, spousal abuse. That's another thing our group is working on, because we serve a clientele that is not served by the CRC and other programs. So I didn't know if you had any general thoughts about the county's approach to that with respect to homelessness and domestic violence and things. Thank you.
Yeah. Just backing up, I think we've been in a real crisis around homelessness ever since Reagan cut mental health services in the 80s, and we're suffering. And so there's no, anyone who pays attention to these issues and cares about our neighbors has to see the intrinsic relationship, that connection. So we do need to do a lot better, and we do especially need to do better at the county, because it's the county's job to be addressing these mental health issues. And one of the ways we've really fallen down on it is the only place we have in North County for beds, mental health beds, is Tri-City, right? And so that's just like a completely insufficient solution to a much larger problem. So I think there's a number of things that we need to do. So first of all is we really do need to be investing in wraparound services. So for homeless folks, yes, it's important to provide shelter, and that's usually on cities to do, but then the county needs to be a real partner in making sure that social services and mental health services are available actually, you know, in an integrated, sort of very easy to access way at these at shelters and for folks that are housing insecure. And that's something we haven't done a good job at, frankly. I wouldn't just say we have done some of it. The county has done some of it. It just hasn't been good enough. And certainly hasn't been sufficient to meet the demands of the moment. The second thing is that we don't have sufficient step-down services whatsoever. So, you know, it's hard enough to get a bed, and that's already a big problem. But then, you know, you're just released. You can just be like released into the streets without any, you know, real plan to sort of support folks. So either you're in a bed or you basically nothing. So the step-down services is a big gap, and that's another place I think that we really need to invest. And it, you know, I've been getting attacked by my opponent for wanting to increase spending, increase taxes. It's very short-sighted, because it's a dollar spent now is $5 saved later. You know, you're much better off in investing in step-down services, and then you don't end up with people in mental health crisis like in a bed, or, you know, investing in mental health services and social services to help folks, you know, pay for food and you know, maybe get back on their feet if they lose their job, rather than ending up having to help folks who've already lost their home because they couldn't pay the rent and they're homeless on the streets. And now the process of getting someone off the streets is extremely expensive. So we have a very short-sighted way of thinking about fiscal discipline in our county, where it's always on the cheap. And on the cheap means on the expensive in the long run. So it's like a penny saved is a dollar spent. And that's what my opponent's sort of entire orientation is about. She's like pinching pennies and wasting dollars in the long run. So that was like a more of an economist answer rather than a human rights focused answer. But you know, I think that in this case, those things go together.
Other questions?
I have a little bit of a follow-up question to that. Is one of the stumbling blocks that we've uncovered when we've been looking at issues surrounding homelessness, at least in our community in Encinitas, is a lack of public awareness and a lack of public support for any kind of outreach to that community. And I'm just curious about your take on that, and how the county is educating people around the homelessness issue, and how we as a faith-based organization can help with that.
So I will say, I'm probably not like necessarily the answer you'd love to hear, but the truthful answer is that, you know, I come to this work from a background as an organizer. And I think there's some problems that elected officials can solve, many problems. But the problem of a lack of public will is not a problem that elected officials can solve. That is a problem for organizers. And you guys are doing the hard work. And to the extent that I can partner with you and help you, you know, make sure that you have the information you need to organize the community, I would be an eager partner. But at the end of the day, the work to sort of, you know, shape the preferences of our community about, you know, what people want, the organizing work, that's not the job of the county. That's the job that has to be the job of like the community as an organizer, sort of what do we want to talk to our neighbors about, and what do we want the shape of our community to look like?
Yeah, good. We applaud that and understand it. And I think it's a very fair answer, and part of the reason that we exist and that we're here and trying to do the work that we're doing. We have run an hour. I don't want to cut people off if there are other questions, but I also don't want to impose on Tara's time unnecessarily. Are there any further questions?
Unless there's a serious one, I have what I hope is a fun one at the end here. Tara, you said you went to Yale for undergrad, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of friends who spent time in New Haven, either as undergrads or in graduate school. Who has the better pizza, New York or New Haven?
No, that's the wrong question if you know people in New Haven. The question is who has the better pizza, Pepe's or Sally's?
Ah,
So
okay.
there's a pizza rivalry, and it is a big issue. It is a fundamental issue. So yes, the answer is Sally's has the better pizza. So you can pass that along to your friends.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
But no, I mean, I'll tell you, the thing I missed, God, I missed so much. So much I missed fish tacos. I cannot even begin to tell you. I eat at Fish 101 like twice a week. But I really miss fish tacos. Nobody has a fish taco like San Diego has a fish taco.
Right you are. Well, on that note, I think we'll call it an evening. Tara, we're very grateful for your time and understand you have a busy and demanding schedule. And how many days do we have left?
Mail ballots arrive in 2 weeks.
Okay, ballots arrive in 2 weeks. So
Yep.
I will.
So tell your friends about this election so they vote.
Yeah, for sure. And tell everybody, and you all make sure that you get your ballots in early.
Yeah.
I won't say early and often. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara, very much.
Okay,
Have a good rest
bye.
of the week. Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Thanks.